Hello, my name's Chris, what's yours? Welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me as we begin John Pertwee's final season in the role. The last time Doctor Who visited Earth's real history rather than a mock-up war simulation, could be argued to be Atlantis in The Time Monster. But you could even contest that given the sort of mythical status that Atlantis has. And I think that's what I'd go for, but I could be swayed, of course, but even then, we visited Atlantis only very briefly in terms of the story's runtime. I don't think you could call The Time Monster historical. So the last time the majority of a story, or indeed the entirety of it, took place resolutely in Earth's history was The Abominable Snowmen, all the way back in 1967. And even that was still set firmly in the 20th century. It was set in Earth's past by decades. So the historical setting of the Time Warrior really makes this feel very different. And that's quite refreshing. And this is enhanced by a couple of other things, and it's amazing what a difference a couple of cosmetic changes can make. The new titles give the impression of a show refresh, which is something sorely needed following the double loss of Manning and Delgado. It's a simple thing, but when new titles hit you, you take notice. They're wonderful, Doctor Who opening title sequences. I don't know about anybody else, but I never skip them. Why would I? That beautiful music over strange title sequences feels like the gateway into something wonderful. When they change suddenly, and it is sudden on a marathon, it's from one episode to the next. It's like a splash of cold water. We lost Jo, but the show continues anew, and in that way, it's reassuring. Luckily, Sarah is delightful from the moment she waltzes in. The Doctor doesn't actually show up for quite some time, which is an odd choice considering it's the first episode of a new season, even though that in itself makes it feel like an admirably ballsy move. But when he does, he and Sarah share a nice rapport from the get-go. He sees through a ruse and, like the Columbo he can be sometimes, gives her just enough rope to hang herself before saying that she must have been 5 when she wrote the paper in question. There's no malice in it. He's toying with her. He's being playful with her. It's nice to see because when this Doctor is mischievous, it is infectious. I really like this side to him, and it's one I get to see all too rarely. And the whole exchange shows that he's really intrigued by Sarah. She's lied to get in, but he very obviously doesn't think it's for nefarious reasons. He lets her know that he's not fooled, but lets her continue her charade. I think I might go so far as to say that this might be the most fun Pertwee has been since he joined the show. And had he been like this for more of his era, then I dare say he might have actually toppled one of the other two Doctors in my estimations. This playfulness he brings to the Time Warrior is in evidence previously during his reign. It's just never really been at the forefront like it is here. Now maybe that's because he's got someone new to show off in front of, that he accentuates the lighter side of his Doctor and therefore provides a warmer welcome for the new companion. That could certainly be the case on his end, but that might suggest that this lightness of touch isn't already in the script to begin with, and it is by the bucket load. He's given so many wonderful lines by Robert Holmes, who is firmly my favourite writer of the show so far. So, for example, when the Doctor's asked if he's serious, he replies,
"About what I do, yes. Not necessarily the way I do it."
And I think that this might be the greatest understanding of the Doctor by a writer so far. That irreverence that the character has in the direst of circumstances has been present since Hartnell's time, becoming ever more prevalent as the show went on before firmly taking root during Troughton's time. And that isn't to say that the humour is given exclusively to the Doctor as well. There are other characters in this story, they are peppered throughout, that Holmes gives their own comic flair. And there's a lovely exchange when the Doctor finds Professor Rubish in the medieval castle.
Yes, well, you're in a castle, all right. But do you know the time?
About 4 in the afternoon. We haven't had breakfast yet, you know.
This script is one of the best so far, and like his previous story, Carnival of Monsters, Holmes deploys humour like no other Who writer yet. Where most people use jokes to puncture a scene, Holmes seems to build his scripts out of them. Carnival of Monsters felt like a story which wasn't necessarily a comedy, but was constructed out of jokes. Now, what's, I think, slightly different with The Time Warrior is, even though that is also, I think, constructed out of jokes, The Time Warrior feels like it's being written as a comedy. And I want to stress this because it's in this story, which Holmes litters with comic overtones, that he creates the Sontarans. Now, one of the most prevalent criticisms I saw of Stephen Moffat's time on the show when he was showrunner was Strax being written off as just a comedy Sontaran. Sure, the Sontarans have been misunderstood in the past. They are bungled in the Invasion of Time and even in Holmes' own The Two Doctors. But if you think about Lynx in The Time Warrior, it's as if he's created to be funny. It's like the Sontarans were conceived as comic villains. Lynx is hilarious and intentionally so. For starters, the head being the same shape as the helmet is actually a pretty funny sight gag when you think about it. But then Holmes writes Lynx with enough wit to imply that the whole idea of the race of Sontarans is a joke.
Thus we can sustain enormous casualties on all battlefronts.
It's hardly the language of adept fighters or even a valid boast, but yet here's Lynx proudly declaring it. So my big takeaway based on the Time Warrior is that the Sontarans are meant to be funny. Now here comes a name drop, but I broached this subject when I was lucky enough to share a pint with Dan Starkey. Now, he doesn't just play Strax, obviously. He's an elf in Last Christmas, and he's played various different characters for Big Finish. He's written some as well. But when he plays Sontarans, even though they're a clone race, he is incredibly good at differentiating between them. So from the humour of Strax to the severity of some of the Sontarans he's played for Big Finish. I said that I thought Strax was the best depiction of a Sontaran since Lynx and probably closer to the true intention of what the Sontarans were. He accepted the compliment and magnanimously said that there were various different approaches to Sontarans, none of them less legitimate than the other. And that is of course true. They can be very effective villains when they're played straight. But I think the first time we meet a Sontaran here, he's no less effective a villain, but he's still a funny one. And if you think of that running joke that Strax can't tell the difference between girl and boy, that has its roots here in the Time Warrior.
You have a primary and secondary reproductive cycle. It is an inefficient system. You should change it.
The Sontarans are meant to be funny. The reason I like Holmes so much is that he does view comedy as a legitimate tool in the writer's arsenal. It isn't purely meant to be apart from the story and used as a diverting interlude, although it can be. It's far more versatile than that, and it can be woven through a piece of work to enrich and nourish it. And it can help with the accessibility of a piece of work to those who, otherwise might not engage with it. The Time Warrior has an energy from the start, and it rattles along, helped in no small part by the jovial nature of it. Professor Rubish's blindness, having left his glasses in the present, starts off being played for laughs, but not necessarily all cheap ones. The context of it ends up elevating the relatively simple phrase,
Are you wearing a hat?
into one of the biggest laughs in the show. The brilliance of it is that it doesn't just give opportunities for gags, it also goes on to help progress the story. I think my point is that Holmes is better at knitting together various different elements of storytelling to form a more satisfying whole. And what of the new arrival? Well, as you know, I loved Jo with all of my heart, but if you remember, I don't think she had the most auspicious beginning on the show. On the other hand, Sarah Jane Smith hits the ground running. She's bolder than Jo for a start, shouting
"Get lost!"
to her assailants in a way I'd find it hard to imagine Jo doing when she began her time on Doctor Who. Jo wasn't really allowed to prove how great she actually was for a while, whereas Sarah gets several opportunities to do so from the off. Not only that, but when she mistakes the man from the stars to be the Doctor, she's quite capable in developing a plan to capture him. And this makes for a nice take on the Doctor-companion dynamic upon their first meeting. So, Liz was sceptical for sure, but I don't feel like this level of distrust between a new companion and the Doctor has been there since Ian and Barbara back at the very beginning. I do have to stress though that while I think Sarah is brilliant in her first story, the comparisons I make with Jo are with Jo early on. Sarah makes a better first impression, although at this point she's still got a way to go to usurp Jo in full stride. Elizabeth Sladen is enchanting though, in the same way that Katie Manning was. They're just playing very different characters, and early doors, Sarah is being better served by the show than Jo was. A very promising start to season 11 with a brilliant new creation in the Sontarans, a brilliant new companion in Sarah Jane Smith, and a Doctor reinvigorated. And what makes that all the more impressive is that at this point Pertwee was apparently feeling rather weary at this point, a little bit downhearted by the loss of Delgado and the departure of Manning and the upcoming exit of Letts and Dix. But it doesn't show, not one iota. This is a Doctor seemingly raring to go. As am I. A friend of mine, upon discovering that you don't learn that the Doctor is a Time Lord until the end of the 6th season, marvelled at the long game played by the show, and he was further impressed that you don't actually find out until the 11th season, the 357th episode, that the planet's name is Gallifrey. And there's most definitely a frisson when that occurs, as another little bit of the Doctor's backstory falls into place, reminding us, even this far in, how little we still know about him. A further 2 episodes, bringing the total up to 359, round off one of the best Doctor Who stories so far.
You have a primary and secondary reproductive cycle. It is an inefficient system. You should change it.
Irongron's guards in episode 3, who the Doctor and Sarah breeze past pretending to be friars. They're not good. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this first date with the Sontaran and Sarah, then you know how YouTube works. Please do give the like a bash and share it around. And what do you think of the Time Warrior? Does he get season 11 off to a flying start, or are you sorely missing Joe? Are the new titles an improvement, and do the Sontarans make their mark as a truly excellent monster, or does that come later, if at all? And what do you think of Sarah? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for a story which probably has the greatest disparity between quality of story and realisation of ambition. So, if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I'll see you back in the future.